It's January 1967. A new year has just begun, and things in McNairy County have been quiet ever since Buford shot and killed Louise Hathcock about a year before. This January night would change this, however, when Buford stops a speeding vehicle near Eastview. As he approaches the car, a volley of shots rings out. Buford is hit twice in the left cheek, one time in the forearm, and a fourth shot grazes his abdomen. The car speeds away, leaving Buford for dead. Well, that's the story as Buford would tell it. But let's try to separate the facts from all the speculation and see what really happened.
Hi, I'm Mike Elam, and this is Buford Pusser, the other story.
Today we're going to discuss the January 1967 ambush attempt near the state line when Buford was wounded. And we want to separate the facts from all the speculation and fiction and see what really washes out here. Now, this is where things begin to roll into the ambush that took place on August 12th, 1967. But in January, let's discuss what we do know about that particular attempt. First, we know that Buford was indeed shot 4 times. We also know that he was not seriously wounded. He only spent one night in the hospital. The firearm that was used in this alleged attempt was a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun. We also know that the perpetrator was never identified, which is kind of a sign of all the other attempts on Buford's life. There were never any witnesses and no one was ever truly identified. And lastly, we know that Carl Douglas Toehead White had walked away from his prison and was out on the loose during this time. Of course, Buford would speculate that Towhead was behind the shooting, and I'm curious if it was actual speculation or if there was some truth to it. So we're going to take a look at that. First, let's discuss all the possible suspects that could have been involved in the shooting of Buford Pusser. First, there was Towhead White. Now, this could be in retaliation because Buford had shot and killed Towhead's said-to-be wife. He and Louise Hathcock were allegedly married, although there's never been any proof of that, and it could have been a revenge shooting. There's also speculation that it could have been Buford's black girlfriend, Pearl Wade, although no one has ever really developed a hard motive for why she would have tried to kill Buford. Then, of course, there's Buford's wife, Pauline. Buford had been having affairs with multiple women, and had also been physically abusive to her, giving her reason to want to be the one to have shot Buford. Of course, there's many that think that Buford's wounds were self-inflicted for the purpose of getting local and regional law enforcement officials to capture Toehead White, who had walked away from prison. Buford is said to have been afraid that Toehead was coming after him for revenge for having killed Louise Hathcock, who was White's alleged wife. This is a photo taken of Buford the following morning. As you can see, his left cheek is bandaged, as is his forearm. Of course, this was big news in McNairy County, and local and regional newspapers would carry the story as people there were interested in what was happening to the sheriff. This is one of the more accurate news articles that came out, so let's break it down section by section. As you can see in this first section, it says that Buford walked up to the driver's window. The driver opened fire with a small caliber handgun, probably a 22 or 25 caliber. 2 bullets struck Sheriff Pusser in the left cheek, 1 in the left forearm, and a 4th bullet grazed his abdomen. As you can see in the second section of this article, Buford drove himself to the hospital in Selmer, where he was treated in the emergency room for his wounds. It also states that he immediately began directing search activities of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and police agencies from 4 states. At 5:30 that morning, he was still on the phone where he had been for the past 3 hours directing these activities. As you can see in this section, informed sources reported that Buford tried to leave the hospital to go search for his assailants, but the doctors refused to release him. Now, when the shooting first occurred, Buford could not identify his assailants in the vehicle. All he could offer was a description of the vehicle and the state that the tags were associated with. Now, as we've already established, Buford was coordinating all the efforts to capture his assailants. But here's a section of the article that says that the FBI is seeking Carl Douglas Toehead White, who had escaped from prison. So why would they immediately suspect him, unless, of course, possibly Buford suggested that? This, of course, leaves us to wonder, was it Towhead that shot Sheriff Pusser? If you want to keep these videos about Buford and the true story coming, please hit like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now at this point, we don't know if Towhead was the one that shot Buford. We may never know. But Towhead was smart enough to know that with his name being mentioned as a suspect and being an escapee from prison, his life was in danger. And so what he did next was a little unexpected. Toehead was a smart man. He knew that he was a target now of every lawman in the region. He knew that shooting a cop was one of the worst things that you could do, and if police found him, they might shoot first and ask questions later, so he actually turned himself into the FBI. They told him where that they could pick him up, and he refused and said that he would just return himself to Maxwell Prison in Alabama, and that's exactly what he did. As you can see, after turning himself in, Towhead was sentenced to an additional year in prison for his escape from the Maxwell facility. With Buford being shot as he was, it leaves us with several questions. I mean, the main one is, who shot Buford? There's lots of suspects. Was it Pearl Wade, his black girlfriend, Willie Wade's niece? What would her motives have been for shooting Buford? Then we have to look at Pauline. She had reason. He was having multiple affairs. He was physically abusing her, as we now know. Was she with Buford that night? Did Buford and her run into each other and it was just a spontaneous incident? We don't know. Was it Toehead White? Now, Toehead was Buford's main nemesis, and like I've stated before, out of all the people in this story, Toehead was the one who actually earned his reputation. I've never believed that Buford earned his, but Toehead was about as bad as they come. So we have to think about that. Was he after Buford when he escaped from prison, seeking revenge over the death of Louise Hathcock, who was supposed to be his wife? We've never found any evidence that they were actually married, although her social security cards, driver's license, all reflected the name Louise White, and all that was done in the last 9 months of her life. So we have to consider revenge is a possible thing, but there's some things here that are really questionable. For instance, would Toehead have used a 25 caliber handgun to try and bring someone Buford's size down? I mean, Buford was 6'6", 250, 260 pounds. People I've talked to that knew Towhead said he would never be caught with using a 25 caliber. He was going to use something that would get the job done. So we have to ask ourselves about the shot placement, which leads us to Buford. I mean, you consider 2 holes in his left cheek. His teeth weren't damaged. His gums weren't damaged. His tongue was not damaged at all. Just in and out. What are the odds of that? You know, all these brings up hallmarks that you'll see in later shootings that he was involved in. It seems like somebody is always shot in the head or face, and there's never any witnesses. It just seems strange to me. So you have to ask about Buford. Was he so intimidated by Toehead White and afraid that while Toehead was out of prison that he was going to come looking for Buford? Did he have these self-inflicted wounds so that he could convince and set a fire under law enforcement that they needed to capture Toehead and get him back in prison? Was Buford in fear of his life? So that's one of those questions we have to ask. We may never know exactly who shot Buford, or if his wounds were self-inflicted. But having said that, we'll see some of these issues come up in later stories. I mean, after all, this incident, the way that it happened, kind of laid the groundwork for people saying that Toehead was the one who directed the August 12th ambush from his prison cell, even though we find no proof of that. So at any rate, there you know the circumstances around the story of the shooting of Buford Pusser in January of 1967. So next week we'll have another video out. I would like for everyone to put their comments out here about who they think it was and what they think their motive was, and try to analyze the shot placement. There's several things here that don't make sense, and I would like to see us all discuss it. At any rate, we'll see you next week. New video, and all these from this point on are going to be leading up to the August 12th ambush, so it's going to start getting good now. See you next week.